All right, everyone, continuing now with Chapter 11's notes, music radio programming, and we are now looking at the station's sound. What makes a radio station unique? The four main elements that go into creating the sound of a radio station are the music, the jocks, the imaging, and the commercials. The art of radio programming is finding just the right balance as these elements come together. The way that you manipulate all of these different elements is going to create a unique voice of sorts for your particular station. This is how competing radio stations with competing formats in a market can be vastly different from each other. You know, WQDR and B93.9 are two country stations in the Raleigh market, but they have fairly different overall sounds to them, which makes them attractive to certain audience members more so than others. Let's look at the anatomy of the clock. This is the piece that kind of brings everything together when it comes to creating a station sound. One of the program director's major responsibilities is to construct one or more clocks that serve as templates for each hour of a station's programming. A clock will divide any given hour of programming into portions for music, and many times that music will be broken up by category. Also, station elements like jock chatter, weather, news, imaging, promos, those sort of things. Commercials also get put into this clock. It'll also provide specific placement for each of the elements that make up the hour. So it's not just kind of putting together an order of how things will go in the hour, but you're also estimating the actual times that these things are going to happen. The most common day parting strategies are these that you see listed on the screen here. And with each of the different day parts, you may have a separate clock that governs each day part. You might have multiple clocks that go into a particular day part, so that there's a intentionality that happens in the audio that you hear, the order that you hear that audio, the way that it's all put together to create that unique sound that we're talking about. It's all very well thought out. It's not really done on a whim. There's intentionality as to what you hear, when you hear it, how long you hear it for, and all those sorts of things. That's what the clock helps us to do. Now, the music, it'll be broken up into various categories. These categories might be used in various different ways, and we're going to talk about some of the names of categories that you may encounter at a radio station, especially if they air contemporary music. These names are not necessarily standard from station to station, and the rules for each category may change from station to station, but it kind of gives you an idea that there is going to be a breakdown of how program directors and music directors look at the music selections they have and how they put them all together. First off would be the power category. This category contains the top 10 songs in the format. They're going to be the most popular of the day. They're going to receive the most airplay. So if it's a top 10 song, you can expect to hear that song. You're going to hear a top 10 song several times over the course of an hour. Here's how what's on top is determined. It can be through listener feedback, what listeners are saying are their favorite songs. It can be through the national airplay rankings, such as Billboard charts. It can also be through local record sales. That one we're not seeing as much anymore because there's not as many record stores around anymore, but they can look at top downloads from various services and see what songs people are downloading to own, what songs people are requesting on various streaming platforms and other aggregate sites. They take all that into account to determine what the top songs in the format are at that particular moment. The current category contains the remaining 20 or so currently popular songs. They might be subdivided by tempo or mood or by popularity. Many times when a station puts a clock together, they will sometimes consider the pacing of the song so that perhaps they start a music set off with something that's kind of high energy and up and then work their way down from there, or try to create another balance between tempos in other ways. Recurrent songs are songs that are no longer powers or currents, but they've still been pretty big hits within the last couple of years. So they're things that are still pretty popular in the landscape, but they're not the newest and fresh songs that are out there. Power Gold. This category contains records that were very big hits in the past 3 to 10 years. These are the songs that pretty much are kind of synonymous with the format. Artists that are synonymous with the format. Core artists would be the name, the term that is used here. They will always be recognized by the target audience and immediately identified as classics. They greatly enhance the format because listeners get the impression that the station airs a broad range of music, trying to add a certain amount of variety, if you will. From there, you go to gold songs. It's the best of the best from the past 10 to 15 years that are not in any of the other categories that we've mentioned. These songs have long-lasting staying power, even if they're not as popular of songs, or they're not from those core artists that we've talked about before, but they're songs that bring a certain amount of nostalgia, or reminding people why they love the format as a whole. Now, oldies comprise of the largest group because it covers the greatest span of time. And as we're talking about oldies here, you can talk about it in terms of a format in and of itself. Songs from way back when, and that's a format in and of itself. But also within particular formats, there's going to be songs that are older that every once in a while it's good to throw one in for nostalgic sort of reasons, and to kind of help lay, a little bit of the history, the foundation of the format. You see the categories that songs tend to be broken up in terms of basically the way that music has evolved over the latter half of the 20th century. Mid-50s to 64 would be kind of the rock and roll era. 50s would also include doo-wop. Once you go from 65 to 72, that's kind of the classic rock or classic hits era. 73 to 80 is going to focus a lot on soul and disco and funk. And then 80s into the early 90s, you've got your bubblegum pop, you've got your hair bands, and all of those types of music there. So those are songs that may fit into a category for various types of formats. It's important for programmers to realize that a song that is a huge hit in one market can be a dismal flop in another. Again, the format is not going to be necessarily ubiquitous throughout the country. There's going to be local favorites. So for example, here in Raleigh, if you're listening to a country station, you might hear a little more Scotty McCreery on the station than you might in other markets, because Scotty McCreery is a Central Carolina guy. And there's that favorite son sort of appeal to him. In other cases, you might have regional styles that are much more attractive to some people. Locally here in Sanford, 105.5 airs a classic hits format, and on the weekends, they focus a lot on beach music because that is a favorite in coastal Carolina. So it's important to know the little nuances and things about a format that are special to your local audience where you are. Now, in doing research, Music tastes within a format tend to be more homogenized nationally today than in the past. However, as we have been talking about, successful programmers are always aware of and will take advantage of the market-specific variations, those particular things that your audience in this area are going to enjoy more than perhaps listeners in another market. Call out and web-based research get reactions directly from radio listeners. And we've talked about different ways that those things can be done in the past, or mentioned again in your chapter here. Call outs, where a radio station will call listeners and play hooks of songs over the air to get feedback. There's also the auditorium test, where they may bring several people into a room and play several hooks to get overall group reaction. The web also becoming more popular now, with certain stations in certain formats doing what they call listener labs, where they invite people online to listen to various sections of songs and give their reactions in that way. Rotations. Music stations must control rotation, or the frequency of play of different kinds of songs. Songs that are hits are generally going to have a faster rotation. You're going to hear them more often throughout the broadcast day. You're going to hear that category more throughout the broadcast day. But even within that, there's going to be different restrictions on songs that helps the music director and the program director create the kind of flow that they want for a station. This can involve all sorts of different types of restrictions, such as perhaps not playing two male groups in a row or two female groups in a row, not playing two fast songs together, perhaps artist separation from not playing the same artist within a certain length of time, those sorts of things. And here's some other examples here. Computers can be used to follow a category rotation. They can restrict certain songs to particular day parts. Perhaps a song is better suited at night than in the daytime. Many stations, especially rock-oriented stations, will tend to play longer cuts of songs during the evenings and during the weekends. That's something that is appealing to their P1 listeners. They might balance up-tempo and down-tempo songs. We've talked about that. They could avoid the scheduling of two songs by the same or similar artist and putting distinctions that an artist may have been with a certain group at one time or another. Computers can also be used to prevent songs from playing too close to the same time every day. So if you had a song that played in the 9 o'clock hour on Tuesday, you don't want that song coming up again in the 9 o'clock hour on Wednesday. You can also prevent adjacent songs of the same type from running together. You don't have two powers running together, two golds running together, that sort of thing. It runs the gamut of what you can do with music scheduling software. Adherence to such restrictions, as a result, winds up leaving most of the control in the hands of the program director. Very rarely are you going to find a station where the jock is actually picking the music that is being played over the air. All of that is controlled by the program director or by the music director. Sometimes, once the log is generated, they may even give the jock a list of the songs that are supposed to be played during their shift, and they need to make sure that those songs make it onto the air. Now, speaking of the jocks, most contemporary stations rely on conversational jocks who just talk normally, as they would with a friend, when they open the microphone. What they talk about and the attitude with which they convey the information is what makes each talent and format distinctive. Do they talk at the audience, or do they talk to the audience? Do they relate to the audience? Do they have a certain demeanor that is appealing to the audience members? Are the things that the jocks talk about relevant to the people that they're talking to? Are they things that they care about? Whether it's issues going on in the community, or things about their favorite artists, or would the audience actually care about what's going on in the life of the jock? They get a little too personal, not personal enough, what have you. All those sorts of things are going to be what helps a station to be able to stand out from its competition. The challenge for the PD is to make each day part its own distinct entity appropriate to the audience's characteristic activities at that time, while simultaneously keeping the station's sound consistent across all day parts. A listener that is loyal to the station is going to want to hear the same overall flavor of the station when they tune in the afternoon, as they do in the evening, as they do in the weekend. There's a little more leeway when it comes to morning drive programs. Sometimes those shows can be rather different in scope compared to the rest of the day, but even there, sometimes there's going to be a certain reputation that a station is trying to get out, and they want that consistency throughout the entire broadcast day. But they also, at the same time, want their jocks to have a certain amount of individuality and appeal that they bring to the station. So creating the balance there is something that is a very important aspect of programming strategy for radio. Under the direction of a strong PD, a kind of sameness will develop among all the jocks in a specified format without the drabness or dullness normally associated with sameness. In this context, sameness means consistency and not predictability. The best air talent offers enough of herself or himself to the audience that a relationship develops, and the kind of familiarity translates into more regular listening. Now, I don't think that listeners are going to go so far as to say, oh, that's my friend so-and-so on the radio. But you do develop, as a listener, a sort of affinity for those that you hear on the air when you're listening to your favorite station. They appeal to the listener. And so that sort of openness and warmth is created as a result. Jocks are station personalities and should have personalities that are funny, informative, trustable, and most of all, likable, because again, they're relating to the audience. A successful station can't survive for long playing just music and commercials. Radio needs personality to succeed. The listener is more likely to use an iPod or a streaming service if there's not a compelling reason for them to tune into the radio where the music is decided for them. We're becoming much more of a I want things my way sort of culture. So the appeal of those various online services has taken some people away from radio if they can't find what they're looking for on radio. So radio needs to play up its strength of being that warm, personable medium to make it attractive for people to tune in and listen. Now, one way that some stations try to kind of create the balance between not just being a jukebox of sorts, but also being cost effective is through voice tracking. This is the pre-recording of some or all of a jock's talk points during a shift. Now, there's pros and cons to this. The pro is that there is budgetary savings and there's the opportunity to use better quality air talent than might otherwise be affordable in many small and medium markets. It's not unusual for a jock that is on the air live in Market A to also be voice tracking for a station in Market B and Market C. The con of that is that you have the potential for losing what radio is best at, being live, local, and immediate. If you voice track a shift, say if you're voice tracking the evenings and it's 2:00 in the afternoon, you might not necessarily be relevant anymore in the evening, or you can't respond to something that's going on at that particular moment in time, and it loses that personal touch as a result. Sometimes it loses the personal touch as well, just by virtue of being recorded. Unless you're a real pro at what you do, it can be a challenge to sound live and off the cuff when you're pre-recording your content. So there are those issues that come about with voice tracking, but many stations have embraced it as a cost-effective measure to try to at least have the appearance of sounding live and local. Now, imaging. The first step in positioning the station in the listener's mind is establishing a name and call letters, which will then be used in the imaging or audio vignettes placed throughout the hour to establish the identity of the station. We can also include things like station nicknames and slogans and that sort of thing in here. When you think of your favorite station, the goal of that radio station is for you to think of them and immediately be able to identify who they are. The name should reflect the lifestyle and attitude of the target audience, and the call letters should be easily recognizable and easy to recall. So examples that we have in our market, Mix 101.5, the variety station. Well, they play a mix of music. Kicks 102.9 is a classic hit station that plays a lot of songs that are kind of lively for the era that they were in. People get their kicks from listening to it, that sort of thing. Sometimes the call letters themselves are going to be memorable. Another classic rock station in Raleigh, WRDU. RDU, synonymous with Raleigh, Durham. Trying to create that sort of opportunity there. G105 in Raleigh, being the station that plays the stuff that's new and the stuff that's latest and the stuff that's great. And it's very easy to remember. So all those things are go into not just the naming of the station and how they present themselves, but also the way that they present that naming through the various types of imaging, liners and sweepers, and what have you. The imaging is used in various places throughout the broadcast hour and do so to position the radio station and will establish the attitude of the station. So let's talk about how some of these things are used. Most stations use sweepers between songs during music sweeps. These short, highly produced imaging elements include the call letters, an identifying slogan, an air talent identifier, and they help to kind of break up from moving from one song to the next while also reminding you who it is that you're listening to. Some companies will differentiate between different types of sweepers by assigning them different names, including stabs or quickies. So they might get broken up by category, much like they would categorize their music. Something that's a little more low key versus something that's more high energy. Something with a certain bit of attitude or a quip or a commentary and those sorts of things. Those are ways that sweepers are broken up at some stations. Liners serve a similar imaging and transitional purpose, but are simple scripted voice tracks or live reads without music or effects. They can be used to promote upcoming station events, music coming up, or just a general image for the station. Jingles, not quite as common as they used to be, but you can still find them on certain types of stations, especially oldie stations, adult contemporary stations, that sort of thing. Now, what everyone loves, the commercials, the spots. Finding the delicate balance of the number of commercials to run in an hour and how they run is often going to be the work of intense negotiation between the program director, the sales manager, and the general manager. Most companies will decide on one of two systems by which to set the number of avails in an hour, either doing so by units or by time. So what that means is that when you come to a commercial stop set, generally it is going to be the policy of that station to either air a maximum number of commercials within that stop set or a maximum overall length of time that commercials are going to run. So you might have 3, 4, 5, 6 commercials that run within a stop set. And they count however long it takes to get through that number of commercials. That's the commercials they air. Or they may say, well, we're only going to run 3 minutes of commercials or 4 minutes of commercials within a stop set, so that there's a specific length of time that people know that, oh, they're going to be back to the music within this particular interval of time. There's pros and cons to both methods, and it's basically playing on the psychology of the listener to try to keep them tuned in through the commercial break, while also appealing to the advertisers to make sure that they're getting a fair shake in their commercial running within a stop set, and that the audience will listen. Now, there's sample clocks within your textbook, but the thing to know is that once the clock is put together and the elements are scheduled within the confines of that clock, they're going to take that music clock, they're going to combine it with the traffic log, which has all the commercials for that day, and together they're going to blend into what is known as the broadcast log. That is then loaded into the on-air computer in the control room. So the way this is going to play out, and again, these are examples from your textbook, is that there's going to be certain times and certain ways that there's going to be places within the hour for music. There's going to be certain times for commercials, that music is going to be separated by liners and sweepers, with various types of DJ banter that may be going on, that may or may not be expressed in a clock. In the morning drive time, you see that they also schedule when weather and traffic is going to happen. So anything that could be an element of the broadcast day is going to be put into a clock like this. And sometimes they even include the actual exact times at which those things are going to be happening. When it comes to commercials being scheduled at a specific time, those would be called a hard break. So say that there's going to be commercials that play at exactly 20 past the hour or exactly 50 past the hour or whatever. Those things might also be specifically written into a clock. But this gives you an idea as to what you might be looking at once a program director has put all those things together and figured out how the broadcast hour is going to run. Now, controlling the sound. Part of controlling the sound is the processing that is placed on the station. Once the audio stream leaves the control room, it passes through a series of audio processors before making it to the transmitter and eventually over the air. Many times processing is used to create a certain kind of warmth to the sound of the station. Sometimes there will be compression and limiting that happens in order to prevent overmodulation. Those sort of things are handled through various devices from when the audio leaves the control room and makes its way towards the transmitter. Another trick programmers will use is speeding the music, and they'll do so just slightly. And in doing that, what they're doing is they're trying to add a little more energy to the overall sound of the station. And despite what the textbook says, there have been stations that have also used this tactic to try to insert either more music or an extra commercial or two into the broadcast hour, because when you're speeding content up, you do gain an extra minute or two per hour just by speeding audio up even as little as 3%. Which tends to be the going standard for music to kind of give it that crispness, that higher energy sort of sound. Another consideration for program directors is the overall tightness of the radio station. That is how quickly the station moves from one element to the next. Tightness is achieved by placing triptones or aux marks on audio files. These are sometimes known as crossfades. And this will happen as part of the programming process of loading music or liners or whatever else into the automation system. With proper triptones placed on all audio, a smooth fade happens between all elements. When one song fades out, another begins before reaching dead air. And this also helps to aid in the pacing of a station, keeping it moving forward and not stopping or losing momentum. Not all stations do this, especially if you're dealing with a classical music station or a jazz station, or certain types of rock stations where you have music aficionados that want to hear a piece completely in its entirety with no interruptions whatsoever, with no overlapping audio whatsoever. Those are times where you might not have a tight sort of sound where you actually let a piece play in its entirety. But a lot of stations tend to take on the practice of setting those aux marks or crossfades so that as a song is trailing off, you have another piece of audio that is ready to jump in and will overlap for 1 or a couple of seconds in order to create that seamless sound. This is a good place for us to take a break. We'll finish things up with part D of Chapter 11.